Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 160 of Dial the Gate. My name is David Reed. Thank you so much for joining. We have Armin Shimerman joining us for this episode. He is responsible for creating one of the most iconic alien species in all of science fiction. I'm, of course, referring to the Nox. We have him for a little bit here, and if you are in the chat, you can start submitting your questions. But before we really get into the chunk of this, if you like Stargate and you want to see more content like this on YouTube, it would mean a great deal if you click the like button. It really makes a difference with YouTube's algorithm and will definitely help the show grow its audience. Please also consider sharing this video with a Stargate friend, and if you want to get notified about future episodes, click the subscribe icon. And giving the bell icon a click will notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get my notifications of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this live stream will be released over the course of the next few days on the Dial the Gate and GateWorld.net YouTube channels. Again, this is a live show, so my team who's put together in the YouTube chat are ready to take your questions. We're going to be asking Armin about his time on SG-1 and also primarily his upcoming launch of his third book, Illyria. He's been working on this series for a little. You know what? Let me just go ahead and bring him in and ask rather than just go ahead and continue to blubber. And I have Linda Gategabber Fury with me as well, producer. How are you guys doing? Armin, how are you, sir?
Very fine, thank you. And I'd like to correct just something you just said.
Oh, please.
It is the third book of Illyria. Illyria is a trilogy, but it is actually my sixth or seventh book that I've published.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, so it's wow. Okay, I'm sorry. So
Quite all right.
okay, so this is so tell us about this series.
Illyria, I have had this idea of writing this series of novels about Elizabethan times. So the book takes place in 1583 in England. And it's a period that I have studied since I was a college major, an English major. I am a prolific Shakespearean actor, a prolific Shakespearean teacher. And aside from studying the plays, I've studied the period for a great long time. I became primarily interested in a particular historical character named Dr. John Dee, who looks a little like this, if you could see him.
Hang on just a second here. Let me pull this up here. Oh, okay. All right.
And if he looks like a magician to you, it's because a lot of people thought he was. But he had many attributes, things that he did well. He was a great mathematician. He was a great scholar. He had the largest library in England. Many people came to him to study. And most likely he was a spy for the Elizabethan crown. So my series, Illyria, deals with a particular adventure that he is required to take on, an investigation into the loyalty of a particular count in the English Channel. Many people are not aware that Elizabethan times, and which includes both England and Europe, were taken up with a great deal of antipathy between Catholics and Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
It was a horrible time for people who believed in their religions, and many people suffered. And my book deals with that. And so Dee is asked to investigate the loyalty of a Catholic count to the Protestant Queen, Elizabeth I. In the process of getting ready for the mission, he meets a very young Shakespeare. By young, I mean 16 years old, and takes him on as a student. Now, the book is about finding out who is responsible for smuggling traders, for want of a better term, into England. A lot of missionaries came into England to help Catholics celebrate Mass, but the government always felt that these missionaries were there to overthrow the crown. So the story is about finding out if this count is loyal to the Queen, or is he loyal to his Catholic uh, friends in Europe? And the story is also about how this young man, this William Shakespeare of 16, who is a failed playwright, and becomes the William Shakespeare that we're aware of here in the 21st century.
That's always been the real big. And Linda, I'm gonna give you the next question. You have an a young man who is, and to be fair, English is very young at this point anyway, responsible for about, at that time, a quarter of the English language. In terms of the terms that we use today, we use hundreds. And where did he come up with all this? I mean, he was either divinely blessed or a savant, even after hundreds of years, no one can tap into the human soul like he can. So right. It's interesting that you're taking this direction of, well, he must have had some life experience, so let's tell a story about where
and not just life experience, which I think is very important. I think you're absolutely right, David, about life experience influencing Shakespeare's abilities. But he also had to have access to a great deal of literature, because scholars have pored over his plays and recognized the echoes from other writers. And it's always a question of what Shakespeare was reading at the time he wrote any particular play. So in order to do that, he had to have access to a lot of books. Being a relatively poor actor in the beginning of his career, he wouldn't have had much access. He couldn't afford books. Books were very expensive. So where did he get this access? My premise is that he found John Dee, who had an extensive library, and was able to take advantage of that library and read things. Over the course of my research into John Dee and over the course of my writing the trilogy, I came to find that certain scholars believe that some of the books that were only to be had in John Dee's library, scholars will cite certain books, and those books only existed in John Dee's library. So my premise, which was fantastical when I started, may in fact have a lot of truth to it.
That's the thing. Yeah. We often ask, imagine if the Library of Alexandria had survived, where That's humanity right. would be now. If someone had had access to a fraction of that material and the right mind had been given access to those books, who knows where we'd be. Linda.
John Dee, let me just finish. John Dee certainly felt the same way you do, David, and it was his modus operandi in life to accumulate as many of those books or copies of those books as he could find. He was fascinated with classical scholars, and he read them and wrote about them and taught them the wisdom that those books had to other people. So, Linda, yes, go ahead with your
Linda, actually, I'm very thankful. Linda reads very fast. So when we had the opportunity to secure you, she went ahead and absorbed the material, and I wanted to bring her in to discuss.
Yeah, I dove into all three books, and I'm enjoying them immensely. I'm not quite done with the trilogy yet. I'm about a third of the way through book 3, having done books 1 and 2.
Good for you. And they're not that easy to read, especially in the beginning.
No, and I'm loving the language in them, and I'll definitely gush about that a lot. The fact that you have them speaking in the language of Shakespeare's time really drew me to them and just immediately hooked me. And yeah, they're a difficult read. I was stopping a lot to look up words, but I was having great fun doing that. I'm a librarian, so when you give me something a little challenging, I'm like, yeah, okay. But I wanted to ask you about Twelfth Night, which figures very majorly in your storyline through all 3 books. Illyria is from Twelfth Night. We've got Count Orsino and Malvolio and the other characters. How did you make that connection? I mean, it seems like a very natural one to me, that the island between France and England and the smuggling, that just seems, oh, sorry, cat, very natural. But how did that all come together in your mind, that was the direction you were taking?
Well, first I have to give kudos to a friend of mine, Michael, who is a prolific writer. And just for a moment, my old age has wiped out his last name. Um, Michael Scott, sorry. Michael Scott actually came up with the idea. As I was saying to David, these are not my first novels. And the first novel I ever wrote was a novel called Merchant Prince, which I co-wrote with Michael Scott. And in a lovely lunch in Ireland one day, Michael suggested that we write a series of novels dealing with John Dee, with William Shakespeare, and with the plays. Michael and I are still good friends, but that project, he didn't want to follow up on that. He had other things that were perhaps more important for him. And but that idea stuck with me about mixing history and the Shakespearean plays together. So I decided to start with Twelfth Night, and it's taken me 20 years really to finish my three books about Illyria. And I don't know if I'll ever get around to another play, but so it starts with Twelfth Night, a play that I was very familiar with. I have directed twice, and I don't think I've ever performed in, but I've seen dozens of times. And it's perhaps one of Shakespeare's great comedies. That and As You Like It are perhaps the two best comedies he ever wrote. So that's how that started.
Wow. Okay.
Cool.
I am kind of blown away by the I don't know how you were able to put these out as quickly as you were. I mean, but perhaps
they're not quickly. It's 20 years in the making.
Well, that's certainly true, but I mean, in terms of the books one after the other, you know, I mean, the language in them, the prose, the fluidity of them, I'm really kind of only someone who is well versed backwards and forwards pretty much with Shakespeare could be able to pull something like this off as convincing as you have. It's not easy for a modern person to absorb the content in such a way as to put it back out in a language that's kind of all its own, you know, that you're reading it and it flows. It's like, I don't necessarily always get every word like when you're listening to Shakespeare, but I definitely understand exactly what he's talking about.
And you put your finger on it exactly, David. As an actor, I am very familiar with the experience that oftentimes audiences, and oftentimes me when I sit in an audience, do not understand what's being said. Most of the time I attribute that to the actors and not to Shakespeare. And that's what I teach when I teach Shakespeare, is how to make that language understandable to a modern audience. But that said, there are still passages that are difficult for me to understand, even with my 40 plus years studying Shakespeare. Wow. But I wanted to emulate that sort of language. And if I can do what you just said happens to you when you read it, then I have been very successful, because that's what I wanted. I wanted people to understand it, but as Linda said, sometimes force them to go to their dictionaries and look up words.
That's with any, I think, with any good story, something that makes us, and with science fiction, and with this goes back to Stargate, it makes us go, wow, that was interesting. Oh, pieces of it or more of it than I thought were based on fact. Well, let me go to a library and pick up a book on this and discover something new. And wow, I've fallen in love with a whole new thing that will lead me in a new trajectory in my life. That's what the best literature does.
Right. And one of the things I'm very careful about in my books is, yes, I'm talking about the fictional characters of Twelfth Night. We can talk more about that in a moment. But I was also enormously concerned about the historical facts of the period. And
Correct.
Almost every fact that I use, you can depend upon me as the author. What I'm telling you is the truth. So I'm trying to dispel the idea of merry old England that many people have of this period, and try to tell them exactly how difficult and how tenuous this period was for a lot of people. And I'm also trying to deal with the other things that I told you about, was the education of Shakespeare and the enormous um, um, life-threatening events that were happening because of people's differences of opinion on religion.
Linda.
Yeah. Now, John Dee also appears in the Merchant Prince series, and
That's
that
right.
one's science fiction, and you've got him transported into the future. Um, how did you first discover him? And I mean, he's fascinating. I went and read, a short biography online of him, and I'm like, I got to find a longer one to read next.
Then get yourself The Queen's Conjurer, which is a wonderful book about John Dee.
All right.
But again, we have to go back to Michael Scott. When I first sat down to write Merchant Prince with Michael, I had no idea who John Dee was. And I'm woefully ignorant. For a guy who was studying Shakespeare in the period, not to know who John Dee was a fault in my education. But so Michael introduced me to John Dee, and John Dee has been ridiculed for centuries for one of the things he did. But if you look at the times, and and what he tried to do, not to keep anybody in the dark here, is that it was a period of time when new discoveries were happening all the time. We were finding out that the Earth was not the center of the universe, that there were people living in the South Pacific, that there was a South Pacific. All sorts of things were being explored and found out and blowing people's minds. So John Dee, being a scholar, really attempted to find out more about heaven. And it being a religious time, it certainly seemed like a right thing to do. And he tried desperately to communicate with angels. And he felt that angels were indeed communicating with him.
Wow.
The problem was, for us, in hindsight, we've come to learn, or I've come to learn anyway, that the two or three gentlemen who were called screers, who went into trances and said they were communicating with angels, and John Dee was the secretary writing down what these screers were telling them in their trances. I think these guys were phony. Who knows? But I think they were phony. But John Dee believed them, and after his death, that particular quest of John Dee's made him the laughingstock of a lot of scholars and a lot of historians. And they disregarded all the incredible other things that he did.
Okay.
But now I would say in the last 75 years, his reputation is being burnished, and people are coming to realize that he was enormously influential for the times, and certainly for Elizabeth I.
It's like a Elizabethan Tesla almost.
Exactly.
I've read books on Shakespeare even fairly recently, and I'm like, I've never heard of this man, and it's like, why? He's certainly compelling and makes me want to go and read about him even more.
There is some supposition that perhaps John Dee was the architect for the Globe Theater, and that there are angles in the Globe Theater that may be attributed to him because of their mystical nature. He was both scientist and mystic, and he's not the only one. There were a lot of scientists at that time that were both scientists and mystics, and it's a very fascinating man. And I've spent, ever since Michael brought him into my purview, I've spent my entire life studying John Dee, and as well as other things.
If you look at the book art for the previous books, there is a resemblance there. Armin, is he your avatar in these? Do you kind of put yourself in his place in writing?
In the Merchant Prince, yes, there is that suggestion, but I think, with all due respect to Simon & Schuster, who were my publishers for the Merchant Prince series, I think they were more interested in me as Quark than they were as me or as John Dee. And so they have me sort of represented on those book covers. On my Illyria series, I'm looking at them now, there are no pictures of anybody, really. So no, we didn't do that in the Illyria series.
Understood. Linda, if you can lean into this, I would appreciate it. But I had a long conversation with Linda last night about the books, and I am always, as a sci-fi fan, coming away going, okay, what do I, or what can I take away from this content? What is being said between the lines that I can take on and incorporate into my life, or what is trying to be said about a reflection on modern times? Because any good literature holds a mirror up to all of us.
Right, and science fiction is very good about that. That is the best part of science fiction is it holds the mirror up, and through the prism of fantasy, we get an insight into what's happening right in front of us.
I'm getting a vibe that, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that you're trying to illustrate that we continually have opposition with one another, and have our sacred cows that we hold on to and consider those more important than listening and communicating with one another. Is that reasonable?
Yes, it's very reasonable, and that's something I was trying to incorporate into the story. John Dee is sort of in the middle between these two opposing religious sides. He was a participant in both religions. He was a chaplain, a Catholic chaplain, and as a courtier in Elizabethan court, he took on Protestantism as his foremost religion. His wife certainly was a Protestant, Jane Dee. And so he's mediating between the two, and there is sort of he's open-minded to listening to both, but he's trying to thread the needle of finding out what his mission is about finding out about Orsino. And I've called him the Count and not said his name before. That is the connection. The Count that I was mentioning earlier is Count Orsino, and for those of you who are familiar with Twelfth Night, you know that that's a fictional character from Twelfth Night. But everybody else, besides the fictional characters from Twelfth Night, everybody else in the novels are all historical characters.
Wow.
And they all would have interacted with Shakespeare in the way that I suggest they might.
Yeah, Walsingham it definitely gets a mention, and he was sort of Elizabeth's advisor, but also
He was more an
probably her.
advisor.
Yeah.
He was an advisor. There were two major counselors for the Elizabethan court. One was a man named William Cecil, Count Lord Burleigh, who was the primary advisor, the primary secretary. But the second one, the most certainly at times even more important than Burleigh, was Walsingham, who was in charge of foreign affairs and had an extensive spy ring. It was one of the he wasn't the first person to use spies, but he used it to a great extent and was able to keep Elizabeth on the throne for as long as she did, because he was able to find out about the secret plots that were being waged against her. It was always a threat of the Elizabethan government that Elizabeth was going to be assassinated. And what people, for the most part, don't know was that there were many attempts to assassinate Elizabeth.
Oh yeah, she wore clothes, enough clothes to prevent assassin's daggers from going after her.
And ironically, or ironically perhaps is not the right word, but interestingly enough, one of the assassins that tried to kill Elizabeth was a relative of William Shakespeare's.
That's correct.
Wow.
No, a relative of his father's.
Well, actually, a relative of his mother's.
Oh, his brother's. Excuse me.
Okay.
I apologize. And yet, man, it's a brutal period of history. I mean, we're talking about an assassin who had plotted to overthrow her, was disemboweled in front of her in front of the court, much to the disgust of all, and even Elizabeth. At that point, they're like, you know what, maybe we shouldn't even do this. It was a pivotal period.
They never backed away from gore.
No,
I think their understanding, if I may, was that if we made the punishment gory enough,
correct,
that we would persuade people not to do anything that they shouldn't do.
Yeah, it's a period of time where if you said the wrong thing to the wrong person, you would be put to death.
That's right.
And we in a modern world can't realistically fathom that level of stress. When you believe in something so devoutly because of X, Y, or Z, and What a world to live. And on top of that, it was a very smelly world. Like one of the things that you're doing in the book is you're very sensory in these books as well. I mean, the Thames stank.
And the people stank, and baths, the Queen took a bath twice a year.
Yeah.
And people stank, and that's why perfume civet was used constantly to cover up the odors of people. But going back to your question about science fiction, how is that related to my books?
Yes.
Certainly. There's an episode which Linda, I think, has already read because it happens in the first book, where he has a trance-like event where he's given some information that comes from outside of himself that could be heavenly information. There's that. Because my Merchant Prince novels are indeed, as you said, David, science fiction. I wanted to not deal with that so much. I wanted to deal with actual history as opposed to possible science fiction. The great thing about science fiction that I've learned over the years, if what's science fiction in the 1950s becomes a reality in 2021 or 2023.
Yeah. Yep. There are some things that were used on Deep Space Nine, like pads, for instance, and LCARS displays that we take for commonplace now, even talking to the computer.
Yeah.
It's amazing how fast it happens. And who predicted which one first? I mean, so there's a reason that the iPad is called a pad.
That's right. And there's a reason, if I may, because Leonard Nimoy told me years ago that there's a reason why the flip phones look the way they are, because they were designed by the designer to look like communicators from Star Trek.
Can I have a quick aside since you brought up Leonard?
Sure.
I'm a huge audiobook fan, and I loved Alien Voices.
Thank you.
That was just a treat, especially the Time Machine. That there's so much that Leonard, John Delancey, you, Roxanne, Andrew Robbins, you guys made. I'm disappointed that they're not on Audible. A couple are on Audible. But if you in the audience have not heard these, they are extraordinary listens, especially if you're Audible fans, especially if you spend a lot of time on the roads. Wonderful adaptations of science fiction literature that just they come to life.
Well, thank you. For those who don't know, John Delancey and Leonard Nimoy decided to bring the Star Trek actors, some of the actors together to do exactly what David just described. And we did, I think, don't quote me, but I think 5, 6, maybe 7 different science fiction novels, and read them for voiceover. We actually did Lost World, which is Arthur Conan Doyle book, on camera. I don't know if that's on Audible or not, but and it was a great time, and it was. And I got to work with the incomparable Leonard Nimoy, who directed the actors in the project. It is long before I was on Star Trek, I was a huge Star Trek fan. So the idea that Leonard became a peer and a friend is one of the great satisfactions of my life. Absolutely.
And I hope that they make their way to more available places. I'd love to have John Delancey on to discuss. I'm curious, did COVID spur your consumption of time to make this trilogy more possible, or was this something that you were planning on setting time aside for and getting done anyway?
Well, to answer that question correctly, I have to tell you a little about how I sold the book.
Okay.
So I found a publisher, a wonderful, small publishing company called Jumpmaster Press. I can't praise them highly enough. They're a great, great publishing company. And especially after my experiences with Simon & Schuster, which is a larger company, but rather distant, at least for me as an author. And when they bought the book, after they bought the book, and it was a book, when they said to me, how many words do you have? And when I told them something like 400,000 words, they blinked and said, I don't think you have one book. I think you have 3 books.
Right.
Then it became incumbent upon me to figure out how to divide this one large tome
Yeah.
into 3 different books, which meant from an actor who has worked a lot on TV, the way to do that was simply to have cliffhangers. And by having the cliffhangers, which are both infuriating and leaving you in the middle of things.
The end of book 2.
That's right. That's right. I mean, they are infuriating. Cliffhangers are infuriating. But it was the way to divide up the book into 3 sections. But then, and this is the answer to your question. Then it was incumbent upon me to figure out what to do with that cliffhanger to bring it back to the story that I had originally conceived of. And so a lot of the time during COVID was spent in not rewriting, but finding a pathway from the cliffhanger to get the story, to pull it back to where I originally had it. And I used the time during COVID to do that primarily.
Wow. Are you satisfied with the end result? Is there anything that's like,
I am so happy that particular problem was set in front of me, because I think the books are richer and much more interesting with the cliffhangers and the pathway from the cliffhanger back to the story. I think it also allowed me to go deeper into what I was thinking about, what I was writing about, and really had to conceive of ways to make these characters as real and as viable as possible.
They are the Illyria book series. I'm going to put them on the screen now, if I can pull that off here real quick. There we go. Betrayal of Angels is book 1. A Sea of Troubles is book 2, and coming out soon, Illyria book 3, Imbalance of Power. It looks like arminshimerman.com/shop is the place to go. Is that right, Armin?
I think that's a great place to start. What will happen is I will link you with Jumpmaster Press, where you can purchase the books. You don't actually purchase them from me; you purchase them from my publisher, from Jumpmaster Press. But yes, that's the place to go to start with, or you can go directly to jumpmasterpress.com and buy them there.
And a lovely hardcover box set here available as well. It looks, it's a very nice set.
That comes out, I don't know exactly when this particular episode of yours will air, but the box set comes out in a number of weeks. On the 24th of January, the box set will be available to everybody. Okay. And if you want, if people are interested, Jumpmaster Press will make available to you or to the readers a situation where I can autograph the books for you.
Oh, how nice. Okay, very good. Yeah, this is great. Anyone who is fascinated with history, particularly Elizabethan history, you start digging, you don't stop. There's always something more to discover there. Very, very important part of human history. I think this is a great tie-in to that period, especially, as thorough as you were about making sure that historical accuracy was paramount and key to great entertainment.
Right. And speaking of paramount and entertainment, it always seemed to me anyway, there's a great synchronicity between actors who've done a lot of Shakespeare, done a lot of classical work, who have done a lot of science fiction as well. I think the reason is, when you deal with science fiction, you deal with something larger than life. We're not dealing in science fiction with kitchen sink tragedies, but rather with cosmic tragedies, with huge questions about certain things about humanity. And something about classical training and classical acting gives you the ability to do that a smidge better than the ordinary actor would be able to do it.
Mm-hmm. Very much. Not necessarily, definitely not like kitchen sink, but kitchen table issues, where people come together and discuss these things, and then they go and they sit down and watch Star Trek. It's like, see, that's what I'm talking about. That's what happens when you go too far.
Right. And it is a great tribute to any science fiction program that what you just described is what happens, is indeed after watching a program, hopefully families get together and discuss these issues, which they wouldn't necessarily do if they were just watching, not putting it down, but Law and Order or something like that. You might do that too, but the larger issues that are brought up in science fiction shows usually generate larger debate around the table.
Absolutely. Linda, anything more specifically about Illyria before we move forward?
Yeah, just is there any chance of them coming out as Audible titles at some point?
There is. Thank you for asking that, Linda. My first book, Betrayal of Angels, is available as an audiobook.
Awesome.
It's performed by a phenomenally good classical actor named Ramon Diacampo, who I've worked with. I've directed in a play and has been a friend of mine for a long time, and is an award-winning voiceover book reader. I'm sure there's a better term for it than I just put it, but he's won many awards, and I'm very pleased and flattered that Ramon agreed to do my book. He did tell me that it was perhaps the hardest book he ever had to read. But,
what a compliment!
It was, especially for a guy who's just done Hamlet. But it is that is available for the first book, and in time, I imagine Ramon will read the other two as well.
Fantastic.
Excellent. I really look forward to that.
Anything akin to Shakespeare, as far as I'm concerned, is better spoken than read. You know, Shakespeare, right. You don't read him, you perform him. You know, exactly. He comes to life in all kinds of dimensions. So
yeah, it was never meant to be read. Not Shakespeare never meant to be read. I don't have to tell anybody that. But and it is so much easier to appreciate Shakespeare when a talented actor, a communicative actor, one who communicates well, is able to take the language and make it clear to you. That is a blessing that we all hope for when we go to see a Shakespearean play.
I want to ask about a couple of talented actors that I remember seeing in this little show set on the edge of the frontier of the Gamma Quadrant. And there was it's you and it's Andrew Robinson. And one of my favorite books of all time is Edward Gross and Mark Altman's comprehensive 50-year mission or 55-year mission of I'm sorry, Ed, where you mention you talked a lot about bringing the actors over to your house and you would run the material and run it and rerun it. And at times where you guys should have been, frankly, sleeping or resting to catch up on, all the work that you were doing, but you wanted to get the material right. And my favorite scene in all of Deep Space Nine, and I hope you forgive me for just taking a moment about this, it's a scene between you and Andrew, and you introduce him to root beer. And It's very low key. And you're talking about how Andrew actually says it's insidious. And then he says, but the thing is, if you keep drinking it, you begin to like it. It's so bubbly and happy, exactly like the Federation. Is that the scene that you that the director wanted to go a little bit more high key in, and you guys said, let's just play this because it ends wonderfully with Andrew going, do you think they'll be able to save us? And Quark just says, God, I hope so. Is that the scene that you're yes. mentioning? Man, is the exactly best scene in the series.
Thank you for that. Yes, to start with your preface, for years, I would bring together the actors that I was involved with in a scene to my house during the weekend, and they, out of the goodness of their hearts, giving up time, not getting paid, just because they, as you said, wanted to do the best work they possibly could. They would come to my house. We would rehearse it. We would look at it every which way to Sunday, and be prepared on Monday to do the scene in a way that we thought would be good. So that indeed happened with Andy and I in this scene. And the story, the historical fact actually, is that when we got to the set, as is usual, director said, well, let's read through the scene and see what you guys have. And we did it. And because it was a Quark scene and it was a Garrick scene, the producers had said to the director, this is a comic scene. and that's the way you should direct it. But during the weekend, Andy and I had come up with what you eventually see in the episode that you were so kind about. And we thought there's a lot happening underneath these lines by these two Machiavels, um, the comic Machiavel, Quark, and the true Machiavel, Garrick. And when we finished the reading, the director said, "Well, I can't shoot that. That's not funny." And we said, "We don't think this is funny. We think this is actually quite serious."
You're
In a
you're
comic
in war.
vein.
You're at war.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And Jim Conway, who was the director, very wisely said, "Well, I can't answer. I can't shoot it your way, and you don't seem to want to do it my way. So we're going to have to bring the producers in." And that's a long walk for the producers. It was on the other side of the lot. And they came finally. They came to the set. Everything stopped, waiting for judgment to be made. And Ira Bear, who's the head of the writing team, said, "What's the problem?" We explained the problem to him. And he said, let me see what Armin and Andy have come up with, so we performed that for him. And then he said, "Can you do it this other way, this comic way?" And Andy, who's a phenomenal actor, and I'm a pretty good actor, he said, "Sure, we can do it that way, just to show you what you want." And so we did it sort of in the vein that the producers and the director had originally conceived of the scene. They saw both versions. Ira conferred with his fellow writers who were there as well. He turned back, and I would say 30 seconds or so, turned to Jim Conway and said, "Shoot it the way Armin wants to do it." And so we did it. And they saw it in dailies. And they said, "Those guys are on the right path." They came back to us a couple of days later with some new lines, some new suggestions. We did it again, incorporating the new lines.
Oh, you re-recorded the scene.
Yeah, we re-recorded the scene because they liked the ideas that Andy and I had been using. And we re-recorded the scene, and that is the scene that you see in the final version.
Wow.
Final version.
It's that you're right. There's so much subtext going on there because these are two people who don't necessarily like the Federation, but they appreciate the utility of the Federation when the chips are really down.
That's right.
And when the chips are down and you've got this force coming through and they ain't gonna stop, who do you turn to?
Who do you turn to? Exactly. So it's you're not the only one who said it's their favorite scene in Deep Space Nine. I actually think there are a lot better scenes that I particularly like, and I like that one a lot. I'm not saying I don't like that one, but I'm flattered to hear that you feel that way, David. Thank you.
Linda, anything before on DS9 before we move into? I'm sure fan questions we'll circle back, but
I was working as Bijo Trimble's assistant at the time that Deep Space Nine was filming, and was fortunate enough to, through her and through some other people I know associated with Siddig's fan club, get onto the sets on 3 occasions to watch filming. And I was there the final day. Bijo had me help her sneak a Make-A-Wish kid onto the set, and I don't know if you remember that at all.
I do remember that.
But I just want to thank you profusely for what a good egg everyone was that day. And it was one of the most amazing days on a set that I have ever had in my life. And the way you all treated the young lady was just above and beyond.
Well, Make-A-Wish is a great organization. I participated for a number of years in phone calls to kids who were suffering. And I was very flattered and enjoyed that experience a great deal, because you could hear that, they were a little flummoxed, and it was up to me to bring them out of themselves. No one should have to go through what those kids were going through, or their parents for that matter.
Yeah.
When you have Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, and Linda.
No, just especially for the families that when someone in the family is that ill, it's just really heart-wrenching. And to know that they've gotten an amazing day that they can hold on to and hope around, that's a big thing. So I definitely encourage people to support that organization.
It's a great organization, and the smiles and the enjoyment, because they don't necessarily smile when you're talking to them, because they're a little flummoxed. Like, oh my God, who, I've got so and so on the phone here with me. But I get feedback, or I used to get feedback from the parents saying, you cannot imagine how my son and my daughter appreciated that. So Linda, yes, thank you for helping that.
Armin,
We go
yes.
ahead, Dave.
No,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to ask it if Linda and I actually, I'm asking Linda because I've met so many people. Did we actually speak on the set?
Yes, sir, we did. I was, a bit starstruck that day, and I think I kind of stammered and thanked you for letting us in the door. And your wife was there as well, Kitty Swink, and she was just absolutely amazingly lovely to us and came over several times and chatted. And you were in front of the camera the whole time, so you only had a moment here and there, but David's got the picture.
I just showed it to everyone.
You showed it to everyone. Yeah. Uh, it was just those little moments throughout the day where different cast members came over and posed with the Make-A-Wish kid and got pictures with her and took a moment to talk. And then we all had lunch with you. So
I hope he took his teeth out.
Nothing else came out, but the teeth certainly came out.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Armin, the Nox, season 1 of SG-1, late 90s. I'm not sure if you are aware, you may be, just how important this race is to the canon of SG-1. It is a literal cornerstone, one of the 4 cornerstones that hold up the lore of Stargate, this species. Were you aware of that?
I have an inkling of it. As the years have gone by, people have told me at conventions that sort of thing. I was certainly not aware of that for years, but as I said, in my participation in conventions where people who are fans of Stargate come up and tell me things like that, I'm flattered, and that's great. I certainly had a wonderful time shooting the episode, and if we have time, I'd like to tell you what I think is a really sweet story about how I got that job.
Please.
Okay. So there are 4 Nox. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 Nox in that episode. There's myself. There's Frida, who plays
Laya?
basically my wife. Yeah, Laya. The young man. And there's an older gentleman as well. Well, that older gentleman is one of my dearest and oldest friends, long before Stargate. And in fact, we had met in my early career in New York, where we did a Broadway show together, and we were best buds in that show. And I, for years, have been trying to convince Ray. His name is Raymond Zyko, trying to convince him to move to LA for his career and just for a better lifestyle. And he came out and was living with me and had an audition for Stargate and got cast as that part. Thank you. And after about 2 days after he had gotten the information that he had been cast and was ecstatic about that, the casting director called me up and said, Armin, we didn't know each other, but she called me up. I don't know why she went around my agent, but she did call me at home and said, we'd like to offer you the part of Anteaus in Stargate. And I said, wait, is this the episode that Ray Zyko was in? Now, she had no idea how I could possibly know that, because she didn't know Ray was living with me at the time. And And she said, yes, yes. And I said, I'll take it. And she said, do you want to know about the part or how much money or what the billing is? I said, no, Ray's in it. I'll take it. Um, and so I did. The agent called a little bit later and said, I understand you've taken this part. I said, yeah. Um, and um, and then I did ask a question of my agent. I didn't ask the casting director. I said, is there any makeup involved? Because at this point I was a little tired of Quark's makeup. And they said, no, 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 there's no makeup whatsoever. So you'll be fine. Of course, they didn't tell me about the headdress, which was problematic when we put that on. And because we did that episode in the woods where it rained a great deal, that straw headdress began to wilt as the days went by. That's how I got into Stargate. Thank you, Ray Zaifa.
Wow. And he later appeared on in Voyager.
That's right.
As well. That's terrific. So what did you think of Anteaus and the Nox as a species? These pacifists who really ultimately honestly turn out to be more like Organians from the original series. You know, it's very similar. As a Star Trek fan, you probably recognize that yourself. There's a very similar arc there. We are not as we appear.
That's right. The young don't often do as they're told. I loved it. I love the twist at the end. I love that reveal at the end. And it was a chance, also an opportunity for me to play something different than Quark. Anteaus, whose name I don't believe is ever mentioned in the episode.
No.
He may, but I don't think it is. But in the script it said Anteaus, so I knew that's my name. Which ironically is the name of the theater company. It has nothing to do with Stargate, which I
wondered.
Is the name of the theater company that I helped run or used to help run.
Wow.
But I had a wonderful time. The people on Stargate were just starting their careers on Stargate, and that they, of course, knew that I was now for several years been on Star Trek. So they had lots of questions about conventions, about fandom, about that sort of thing. And they were lovely, lovely people. And if you ever watch the episode again, they rarely shoot you below the knee because all of us were filled with mud from the fact that it had rained every day. There were times, really difficult times sometimes, finding your mark in the mud because the mark was all covered with mud and you didn't know where you were supposed to stand. But that aside, that no one needs to know about, it was a lovely, lovely time. I had a great time with all the actors on the show who couldn't have been sweeter, just really very nice. And of course, when we weren't working, I spent all my time with Ray and we went out to dinner.
Was that the first time you'd worked in Vancouver?
I don't think so. I think I did a small movie whose name I don't remember in Vancouver as well. I've come to realize what a great place to shoot a TV show Vancouver is. They have a great, their bench for crew is phenomenal. They can shoot so many shows there because they have so many technicians who are very good, and therefore you can shoot lots of things there because if somebody's working on one show, another person equally good could be hired to do another show.
Linda, do you have any questions about the Nox specifically?
You said that the headdresses were very problematic. Did you have to go for like costume fittings for the outfits before?
Yes, of course,
sort of
all that, and
yeah.
they took a head cast of my head to make the the straw crown what it was. But because we were in the rain and there was only one, as like say a hero, there was only one hero straw thing. They couldn't replace it. So they were constantly fluffing it up because it was wilting. It was in the rain. It was just wilting.
Yeah.
Wilting.
It's Vancouver.
But because they had to do all that work, it made sitting there a little bit longer as they fluffed it up and made it look as much like the original first day as they possibly could. But I didn't have to wear any prosthetics on my face, for which I was enormously grateful. And again, that's minor stuff. What was really good was the story, which was, I thought, incredibly good. And again, I want to reiterate, I love the twist at the end. Again, the perception that these Nox needed to be helped, that they were incompetent of taking care of themselves, that the humans were superior to the Nox because they were so much better off than the Nox.
Yeah.
And then at the twist to find out, no, it's the other way around. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I love that.
I've always wondered, were they intended to be using some sort of technology we just didn't see? Or did they have, in fact, powers to,
Yeah, what's
use
your
some
interpretation
sense-
of that,
Yeah.
Armin?
I've always thought it was technology. I don't
Okay.
think they had powers, but it is very possible that's true. No one shared that with me one way or the other.
Okay.
But in my own mind, I thought it was technology, which allowed them also to construct their cities up in the clouds. That's not a power. That's simply their technology.
Yeah.
And they had come to learn that simplicity was better than complexity, and that simplicity was what made life worth living. And there's a lot of truth in that, at least for me anyway. As my life goes on, I find that making things simpler is usually the better way to go.
In symbiosis with nature, I got the impression that some of the Nox lived a more traditional. I suspect the ground dwellers were a more traditional lifestyle, whereas the ones who chose to live in the clouds remained more with the more technological
Probably.
side. I
I
suspect.
would imagine. And the sort of hippies, I guess, the hippie version of the Nox. We appreciate living in nature and making it as simple as possible. For which, again, I find that the right track to take.
Romantic in a way.
Very romantic.
So, yeah,
Was there ever
yeah.
talk about bringing your character back again and it just didn't work out, or was that offer never made?
No, the
Frida
offer
came
was
back
made.
twice.
Yes, Frida came back twice.
Yeah.
The offer was made.
Okay.
I got 2 phone calls, I believe, for perhaps the same 2 episodes that Frida appeared on. But both times I was otherwise engaged and could not make time for it. I was very lucky at that period of my life to be working almost constantly, not only on Star Trek, but on other things as well. People are probably aware of my character on Buffy. But I was doing tons of other shows in addition to those 2 shows. So there just wasn't time to fly to Vancouver and do that. I regret that, but I'm glad they used Frida. I'm glad they used Frida as often as they did.
Absolutely. Brad Wright himself has said, because you have to understand there's 4 great races that made up the galaxy eons ago: the Nox, the Asgard, which are the little gray guys in the show, the Furlings, which we never see, and then the Ancients who built the gates. We spend the entire show finding their technology everywhere, but we never find any Nox tech. And it's Brad Wright's argument that he believes that and he created the series with Jonathan Glassner, that the Nox were even more powerful than the Ancients. But
Wow.
They choose not to use their power. They choose to keep their heads down and stay alone, which is an interesting thought.
Good for them. I mean, it was a delightful episode, and to get into the mindset of that was quite wonderful. And again, after once I got the script, I really thought these are great characters, and it also gave me the opportunity to do something completely different than what people normally were giving me. Usually I was playing comic villains and stuff like that. So to play something so soulful and familial, because it was not just about their technology, but about the relationship of these 4 characters, the 4 of us in tights there, was lovely. Just, I don't get that opportunity very often, and so it was a delight. And again, the Stargate people were wonderful as well. So.
Yeah, he's so low key, whereas Quark's a people person.
That's right.
Linda, thank you so much for doing all the research with me to bring us up to speed. You read much faster than I do, and
Yeah,
I
pure pleasure.
thank you, Armin, for all this. I'd like to bring in some fan questions if you don't mind.
Sure, but before you do, I just want to thank Linda for going through the novels and for the very good questions. And I think you'll be surprised. You said you've gotten through the first third of the third book. I think you'll be surprised and gratified by the end of the book if you choose to finish it.
Oh, I've got cocoa to make over on the counter, and as soon as we're done, I'm just gonna curl up and keep going.
Good.
I'm really enjoying it, and I
Good.
can't recommend the books highly enough to other people.
Thank you.
Yeah, I asked her last night. I said, are you now that we're finished? Are you gonna put it down? Finish with the interview tomorrow?" And she's like, "No, I'm not gonna leave this here."
There's no spoiler at the end. There's no cliffhanger in the third book. So.
That's good, or I'd be demanding you write a fourth immediately.
Right, which my publishers are doing. They're demanding I write another one. So.
Oh, excellent. I'm egging them on, and I'm egging you on.
Jeremy Heiner. Armin, what was it like reprising Quark in Lower Decks?
Lower Decks. It was great fun. Great fun. I hadn't been in that mindset for a while, although because I've done enough conventions, one never forgets. And of course, 7 years, how can you forget? And I had the great honor to represent Deep Space Nine on Lower Decks, as well as Nana Visitor did as well. We were very flattered and very appreciative of the fact that Lower Decks decided to use our characters again. And we hope that secretly, Nana and I hope that we get another opportunity to do that.
I hope so as well. Did you have to
to bring in others
absolutely.
In others.
Yeah, they haven't moved. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Picard, because they also were saying that it's a DS9 continuation as well, which all of us are like, okay, interesting.
No, nothing against Patrick, but before they started Picard, he said, "Armin, I love the Ferengi. I love you. We'll get you into Picard." Well, they've done 3 seasons. I've yet to get a phone call for that show. But I think you were about to ask, did I have to wear the teeth?
For the audio.
Yeah, for the audio. I did wear a set of teeth that I had made for me because my set of teeth doesn't fit anymore. One of the things about the human body is that your teeth move in your mouth.
Right.
And so the prosthetic, after all these years, no longer fit the teeth that I now have, or the positions that my teeth are now in. So I couldn't put them in. There was no way to get them in to stay there and actually be understandable. So not for Lower Decks, but for something else, I had a new set of teeth made. So I did wear those teeth for the show, but they weren't constructed the same way the show's teeth were. They were prosthetics, but they weren't constructed. And so there are times when I listen to Lower Decks and I went, doesn't sound like the teeth are in. So yes, they're in, but the sound quality isn't comparable to the original set of teeth that I had on the show.
Here's the thing. You're aging, but Quark was also aging as well. So I think you could maybe make
he
the
ages
excuse.
a lot slower than I do. Ferengi, as I understand the mythology, live a great long time.
That's true. So I would make that excuse, though. Quark's teeth have also changed, too.
One would think, especially since he sharpens them all the time with a little tooth sharpener prop that we had a couple of times on a couple of episodes.
General Maximus just wanted to make a comment. Your character and race are arguably the most underdeveloped in the franchise, and fans are desperate to see and know more. Hear, hear.
Thank you very much. I would be desperate, and I'm sure so would Max, so would Jeff, so would all the other actors who played Ferengi, to see more of the Ferengi. And I would be. People have often asked, would you go back and recreate Quark? And my answer is, I would love to do a recurring character on some show, but that would be terrific. And I hope, as I said about Lower Decks as well, I hope that does happen. I think, being of the age that I am, I would be a little bit reluctant if they were to say to me, we're going to do a whole show around Quark and that you are going to be the series regular. I don't know if I could face that makeup process day after day after day, as well as I did when I was in my 40s. So but to come back and do a recurring character, I would love to do that.
Just for clarification, he was referring to the Nox.
So sorry. Most people ask
That
me
works
about
as
the
well
other thing.
too.
Yeah. And now that I have a lot of time, I would love to go do the Nox. Yeah. Because I really did like that character a great deal. And only because of circumstances was I not able to recreate that character more than once.
Mama Nox, Erica, which one would you relate to being more like in real life, Quark or Anteaus?
Oh, far and away, Anteaus.
Okay.
Far and away. Quark is a lovely character, and actors love to play something other than themselves.
Right.
And some actors love to play themselves. But for me, Anteaus is much closer to who I really am than Quark is. Playing Quark is a little like being drunk at a party and having a lampshade over your head. You can do whatever you want. So I did do whatever I wanted. But Anteaus is that softer side, that gentler side. I think most people who know me would say, yes, that's a better fit for me.
Elizabeth Lee, did you notice any significant differences in production while you worked between the two shows? Stargate was just getting started. It would ultimately do 17 seasons, much like the Star Trek team did.
Right. Because they were just getting started, and that explains what I'm about to say. They were a little slower about moving along, about moving from one setup to the next setup, from moving from one scene to the other. And also we had the dilemma of the rain, which was causing delays on the technical side as well.
Yeah.
So there was that. And also, when I was doing Star Trek as the years passed, I was very comfortable in that skin because I had played it for so long. When I was creating Anteaus, it was a new creation. And, you know, what am I learning about this character as each moment progresses? And so that was a different experience as well. I'm learning who the character is as the 8 days progressed. Whereas in Star Trek, though they would give me different scenarios to play, I knew who the character was, and I knew how he would react to certain things. Although I had to come up with intentions about each script, so there was that difference as well.
Sophie wanted. We recently lost Rene Auberjonois.
I believe it's 2 years now. A little over. It's just recently 2 years.
Yes, and we also lost
Aaron.
Aaron Eisenberg. Can you share a memory with Rene that you had? You spent a lot of time together.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time together.
Coyote and the Sheepdog.
Rene and I had met prior to doing Deep Space Nine. We had done a play together in Los Angeles called Petrified Forest. And although we were both in the same play, we rarely spoke to each other because we had no scenes together. And there was no really reason for us to communicate. And that all changed with Deep Space Nine. The relationship, the love, if I can put it that way, that both of us had for each other became manifest early on. And the writers began to see that in the dailies. And so what was originally an solely antithetical relationship, the lawbreaker and the lawkeeper, morphed into this love-hate bromance, for want of a better term. Our writers were always astounded that as the years went by, Rene and I and Judith and Kitty would take our own vacations together. We would take vacations together because our friendship was so close. There are thousands of incidents that I could probably conjure up, but I love the man. I was in awe of him as well. For those of you who don't know Rene's theatrical career or his resume, It's quite phenomenal. He is a prince of the American theater, and I, being a fledgling actor, was in awe of that. And so it was a great honor as well as a great love affair for me to work with him. And Rene, in the beginning, as we mentioned before, would come to the house. We would rehearse our scenes together, and it's just our friendship grew and grew and grew and grew, and even after the show was over, continued to flourish.
Thank you for sharing that. I wasn't. If you choose to not have anything to add about this, is fine. But I read this as well and was frankly pissed. Evie Cahill. I'm a huge Seinfeld fan, and I recently read about your experience on set, and frankly, I'm appalled by the cast's behavior. How would you compare that to your experience on Stargate?
Oh, night and day.
You're right.
Night and day. I mean, the guys on Stargate were really kind. They were just starting out, so they were very kind, and they were fascinated because they knew that they were going to have to be going to conventions soon,
Right?
And they knew that they had to deal what's fandom like, and they would pump me for my opinions on that sort of thing. So they were very sweet, very very considerate. Couldn't have been nicer. Really were wonderful. And as you read, and I'm a little loath to say it again, but
Right.
but it is the truth. The people on Seinfeld, were less than communicative. They ignored me for an entire week. They rarely said a word to me when we weren't, actually working. It's no fault of the production, but there was a slight foul up, which was they didn't have a dressing room for me, which is against union rules. And so I sat on the bleachers where the audience normally sat on the shoot day. And I was there, I was right there, and nobody really spoke to me, including Jason, who I had known somewhat before the show.
What does it just standoffishness? I mean, it's one of the
can't
greatest
tell you.
shows on television, and behind the scenes, it's like,
I can't tell you.
okay.
I will reiterate something that you probably read because it is the most galling of the events. While we were shooting the show, to make the story as short as possible, it was required that Seinfeld and, forgive me, the lady,
Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
yeah, the three of us were sitting on a small court bench. It was very tight, so that literally wherever you see my headphones, they were just on either side, and I was in the middle, and they were on either side.
Yeah.
And we had to wait 45 minutes for a lighting thing to be fixed. And it was around Christmas time, and the two of them were talking to each other about Christmas and their plans and what they were going to do. And in that 45 minutes, not once did they ever turn to me, who was sitting right between them, and say, "Excuse us for talking around you," or ask me what my Christmas plans were, and that's the way the whole week was like. I was there. The episode is called The Caddy. I was the caddy. I was I don't want to brag. I'm already bragging, but I was a series regular on another show.
Yeah.
I was occurring a lot on a second show. Never once wanted to know who I was. Never once. Now, one of the things that made a difference on Stargate, at least when I was there, and certainly during the 7 years that I was on Deep Space Nine, every series regular always took the time to find out what their guest star's life was about. It's the human thing to do, and it also makes the guest stars more comfortable. So it's a practical thing to do, so that if they feel more comfortable, they will give a better performance. That was not the truth on Seinfeld.
Well, I apologize for the
no, for you to apologize.
All this to say, it's a wonderful episode of television, and what you had to go through to endure to make that a half hour possible. Thank you for it, because it's a great half hour of TV.
You're welcome. And they had made it up to me slightly, it's the one show that I think I get the most residuals from. So I'm very happy about that.
Absolutely. Why not? Oh, Erpel Homo. Armin, what would happen if Quark was stranded on an uninhabited planet with Anteaus? Oh my gosh.
Um,
I
I
would
can't.
not go well.
It would not go well. No, it would not go well. Once they got over talking about Armin Shimerman, I think they would have nothing to say to each other.
Right, exactly. Oh man. Let me see here. Lockwatcher, you have worked as everything from an alien to a judge over the years. In all these years, is there any proper costume that you have kept that is close to your heart? You mentioned you had the teeth. I would hope you have a set of ears.
No, I have nothing from Star Trek except the teeth, and I've thrown those out because they don't fit anymore.
Right.
I have one little artifact up above me that you can't see from Quark's bar that I didn't take that was given me when one of the set designers heard years later that I had taken nothing from the set.
Yeah.
By the way, you asked me a nice story about Rene. Rene drove up to the set. Basically, he didn't actually, but with a pickup truck and a hammer and a chisel, and he took everything he could. No, I have no costumes. I have no props. Um, I'm a dutiful actor. If they give it to me, I return it. And yes, I would like to have some things. And the reason I don't have anything, especially from Star Trek, is that when I heard that they were dismantling the set, I did not want to go and see it taken apart. I wanted to live with the memories of the way that I knew it. I did not want to see it in disarray. And so I said, no, I'm not going back for anything because I don't want to have that image in my mind. I only want to have the image of the way it was.
The final scenes on Deep Space Nine were filmed in Vic's bar, weren't they? I know you had one more scene after the main cast left for the day.
Right.
But earlier in the day, Bijo and I took the Make-A-Wish child over to the promenade sets, and they were indeed dismantling them, and we all just sort of stood there and went.
Well, lucky for me, Linda, I didn't see that because indeed,
you didn't want to.
Right, because the Fontaine set was somewhere else, wasn't on the promenade, was somewhere else. And our last scene, which was Fontaine and I together, Jimmy Darren, we didn't do on the promenade either, so I never saw that.
Yeah, you're lucky you didn't. It was upsetting.
It would certainly be upsetting for me, and I just didn't want to go through that.
No. Agreed. I saw the SG-1 Stargate Command after it was what was left of that soundstage after it was dismantled. It was disheartening. So I mean, it's reality, but at the same time, it's like that always stays with you. So I get it, Armin.
Yeah, I mean, as a young man, just tangential to this, when I was at college, UCLA, they had dismantled the original Star Trek, and the board that Uhura looked into had been given to UCLA, and so it was a rather large piece of scenery, and seeing it for real was disheartening for a guy who was a huge fan of Star Trek. So that was part of my reasoning for why I didn't want to see Deep Space Nine dismantled.
That makes a lot of sense.
Kind of the ultimate breaking of the fourth wall.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's a little like meeting people that you've always adored and respected. When you come to find out who the real human beings are, you can slightly be disappointed at times.
Never meet your heroes.
That's right. Never meet your heroes.
Scott said we've also lost Aaron Eisenberg.
Whose birthday it was yesterday.
Yes. Yeah. Do you have any particular memories of him? Or one that you would like to share?
Every memory that everyone has of Aaron is of laughing. Aaron was one of the most energetic, funniest people that you could ever meet. I'm not blowing smoke up anybody's butt on this, but uh, he genuinely wanted to make people laugh, and he was so enormously kind and large-hearted. And he had lived with his illness, his kidney problems, all of his life, and I think he wanted to spend every moment he could to the fullest extent.
Mm.
All I can remember many things about Aaron, but mostly I remember his need, desire, gift in making people laugh.
You had a a marvelous 7-year run. The Ferengi, I would argue more than anyone, had the best of those 7 years, because you began as one idea in fans' minds and ended in a place where we knew exactly who these people were. They were not who we thought, and they became people we never thought they would become. They became heroes.
They became people.
Yeah.
That was my raison d'etre from the very first day of Deep Space Nine. I had created that incredibly bad impression, and it was my desire to erase that.
Oh, from the last outpost.
Yes, from the last outpost.
Wow.
If you were to ask me what piece of work is the one that you most regret, the last outpost would be absolutely first, second, and third choice. And what I know now of what the Ferengi were supposed to be and what I did with it, including the other 3 actors who played the Ferengi as well, but primarily me because I have the largest part. I regret that to this day. On the other hand, those horrible mistakes led to my playing Quark, where I got the opportunity to not only fix that, as you just said, David, but also to get involved with the franchise, which as a fan, I was normally gratified by that, but also an opportunity to play a character that I believe is perhaps the most human of all the characters on Star Trek. And that's not just my show. I believe the Ferengi are the closest things we have to true humanity. Now, you may think, but they're greedy and they're suspicious and they're conniving and all those things. And I would say yes.
Yes.
But they also have big hearts. And you know what? That's humanity. Humanity is interested in surviving and making the best of things, but also at times can flip that on its head,
or its ear,
on its ear, and do something enormously saint-like.
You know, I imagine there are a number of actors out there who would consider themselves immensely blessed to have a 7-year run at a shot at anything. So it must be very satisfying to look back on your body of work and say, yeah, there's some good ones in there, and ones that parents can share with their kids. They
That's
can
right.
watch TV with this program with their kids and say, watch this character and be like this character. Well, maybe not necessarily at the beginning, but be like this character by the end.
Yeah, and also we provided some stories, not just the Ferengi stories, but other stories that Linda, I think, spoke about much earlier. Things that promoted conversation, that promoted a debate around the kitchen table about, what can we learn from what we just saw?
Mm-hmm.
Do we agree with what the show just said, or do we not agree? Does it promulgate new ideas about certain things? I think science fiction and certainly Star Trek have been trying to do that since the very conception of those ideas.
Have you watched any of the Orville?
No, I haven't seen Audible yet. No.
It's extraordinary science fiction. Extraordinary. It gets going right away. I really recommend it.
Thank you. I will. I don't know why. It may be on a channel that I don't get, but I just haven't seen it yet.
Understood. All right, Linda, do you have anything further?
I'm just wondering whether you have any other projects coming up
Yeah,
that
what's
you
next,
can share
Armin?
with us.
Sure. Um, I found after completing the Illyria trilogy, which was exhausting, but enjoyable, very, very enjoyable and creative, that as the weeks went by and the months went by, I began to regret that I had nothing to do, nothing to write.
Yeah.
So, and as I mentioned briefly, my publishers are begging me to write another book. So I've been dickering with ideas about what another novel might be. Um, and I have sort of begun to think about that. On the other hand, it's a daunting thing to write a novel. And people have always asked me, "You're an actor. Why have you never written a play?" So I have actually started writing pages on a play that also takes place in Elizabethan times, because that's what I know. You know what they say about writers, write what you know
Right, what you
about.
know.
And so there's that. And besides being an actor and a writer, I sometimes am also a director.
Hmm.
I've directed quite a number of Shakespearean plays, and uh, there is the possibility that next year I might. Uh, I've been asked to possibly direct another Shakespearean play, so that's on my agenda. And as far as acting goes, I've learned over the course of decades that my employment just comes out of the blue. It's like the phone call I told you about for Stargate. Things just come out of the blue. So I'm expecting the blue to open up and provide me some more acting work. Although at my age, there's nothing wrong with being my age, but the business tends to look for people a little bit younger than I am. Occasionally they find work for us old geezers, but so I'm not expecting a lot of work. Although I, I tend now to concentrate on work on stage, which was always my first love. And I did a play in Kansas for a number of months back in the summer. And I'm hoping that any one of the theaters I've worked for in the last 2 decades, and they've made noises about it, that they'd like to have me back and do some more plays. And that's enjoyable to me.
You cannot beat the the energy of a live performance
No, you can't.
and
And there's
connecting.
the connection between the performers and the audience is palpable, and not only for the audience. I mean, you've sat in the audience and felt the power of performance on stage, but from the other side, there's no experience for an actor like knowing the audience is with you, whether it's a laugh, if it's a comic play, or a complete silence. Nothing thrills an actor more than hearing nothing,
Mhm.
hearing apps. No one is breathing, nobody is moving, nobody's opening candy wrappers. That rarely happens. When you get complete stillness, you know you have the audience in the palm of your hand, and you know you are working on all cylinders. That there is nothing like experiencing that.
This was a real treat, and I
Yeah.
really thank you from the
Thank you,
bottom of
Dave.
my heart for taking the time with us.
Has
This
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you for talking about my book and the various things I've done in my life. It's a joy for me to share that with others, and it's if I may, I'm particularly enthused by Linda's enthusiasm for my book. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and thank you, Linda, for the research as well. I'm going to wrap things up here. If you need to go, I totally get it, but I'll be done in about 2 minutes here. So thank
Okay,
you, Armin, again, very
my
much.
pleasure.
Armin
Happy New
Shimerman,
Year to everyone.
and to you, sir. Armin Shimerman. And I muted my microphone. I apologize, everyone. I muted both of them. Armin Shimerman, Anteaus in Stargate SG-1. And you can check out his Illyria book series at arminshimerman.com. And that's in the link below as well to support him. Big thanks to Linda Gategabber Fury for making this conversation complete and truly full with this discussion as well. And thank you to my moderating team, Summer, Tracy, Jeremy Reese, and Anthony. Big thanks to Frederick Marcoux at Concepts Web, our web developer over at Dial the Gate. He keeps everything spinning smoothly in the background here. My name is David Reed for Dial the Gate. I thank you so much for tuning in. My thanks again to Armin Shimerman, and we will see you on the other side.